one of the big issues is how do we maintain quality assurance over our brand? Now, not that we're selling something, but you know, there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of people who want to use our label that perhaps aren't as engaged in it as many of you are. And so we need to make sure that we understand what does it mean to be a CDIO program. And as we all know, that starts with the standards. The standards are what sets CDIO apart from almost every other kind of major higher education, innovation, and improvement effort. Because these provide our agreed upon norms. This is what we mean when we say we're a CDIO project. And as you know, they've been updated recently, not dramatically in terms of their content, but some of the supporting documents, such as the rubrics that are associated with each of the standards, then they've been updated, and I think they actually play and make our quality assurance a much stronger process. So the first thing, quality assurance starts with when people have an application. If you think about what you went through when you applied to be a CDIO collaborator, that's where quality assurance begins. So we have 5 questions, though, that we were going to ask to make sure that we have a quality assurance system in CDIO that benefits its members and the larger collaborative. The first question is, how can we make a sound decision about who to admit to the collaborative? Second, how can the individuals, once they get interested in CDIO, find some way to see where they are now and then guide efforts for further improvement, and then keep checking in terms of their gradual improvement in quality. Third, we need to get some sort of a status check on the entire collective. How are we doing at a 5-year period, at a 10-year period, and so on? Are we, in fact, as an entire group, making some progress? Finally, over the last year or so, we've come up with an actual certification process, which might be called Accreditation Light. Right? It's not a full-blown accreditation review, but it gives the regional councils a mechanism that they can use to assure quality within their regions based on their local norms. And then finally, many of us have started to use the standards for actual accreditation reviews, whether it's a programmatic review like ABET might be, or a national review, or some other outside agency that wants to come in and check our quality. So all of these build. In other words, you shouldn't be doing the same thing over again. You should simply be building on each of your efforts that leads to the accreditation. So in the application, we ask us questions. Right? So we need to have some sense of what is this program and why should it be part of CDIO? That's kind of the first actual accreditation question, right? What do we want? What kind of a program are we? How do we describe ourselves to other people? How do we know what our contribution is going to be? How do we organize? What's our level of commitment? Those are all sort of the basic questions that as a program begins to look at itself, it needs to answer. Then comes sort of the first step, which actually, if you think about the accreditation process, is the self-study that happens before, way before the team even comes to our institution. And what we have to do in that self-study, as far as CDIO is concerned, we need to understand those standards. In the session that we had earlier, the question was asked, how familiar are you with those standards? How familiar are you with the standards? Could you recite them chapter and verse? Right? Not perhaps so much, but this exercise actually gives you a chance, and it gives the people in your department or in your program or in your institution a chance to become familiar with those standards, because they are the basic tenets of CDIO. Just as in accreditation in general, you need to gather some evidence. That's where the rubrics come in. You need to look at a ranking You need to do that critical self-thinking. How am I doing? And then identify actions. These are exactly the same things that our accreditation reviews demand. So it's a really good practice, a really good exercise. Have you seen the new rubrics? What we did in the last year or so is, rather than having one generic rubric, which this is the generic rubric, but instead of just having only one generic rubric, what we've done is actually made rubric for each of the standards, used language that's relevant to that standard. So if we're talking about context, we make sure that we talk about context in here. If we talk about syllabus, we make sure we make it syllabus. In addition, we have some evidence that's been gathered that can provide you with some examples of how you might answer each of these. Let's just remind ourselves of the progression. Remember, we start with we're clueless, basically. We don't even know what we're talking about here. There's no documented plan. And many of the programs may come into the CDIO at that kind of basic level. But at least through the initial self-evaluation, you begin to develop a sense of the need of what the areas are that you need to address. Next, there's a plan. So first you know their need to adopt a plan. There is a plan. You've begun to implement the plan. There's documented evidence of the full implementation of the plan, and that now you're using that evidence for continuous improvement. Does that sound like an accreditation process? Yes. But this is for your own purposes of development. So kind of you're practicing that. You would practice the piano, you're kind of practicing at this self-evaluation process, trying to move up from simply having a plan and beginning implementation to actually using your results for continuous improvement. So you're practicing that accreditation process as you go through the standards. Another thing that we do is to develop periodically a CDIO survey. And so it gives you all a sense of where you might fall in relation to other programs. What we have is programs that are less than 2 years old, 2 years or less, those that are 3 to 4, those that are 5 or more years old, for each of the standards. And you can see, fortunately, in our last review, that as programs mature, they rate themselves higher in the various standards. Now, the only one, as was mentioned in the last session, where we don't necessarily are the ones related to faculty development. That seems to be the biggest challenge, to make sure that we've implemented programs of faculty development. Some campuses, there's an external faculty development process you can tap into. It's not so easy to do faculty development within your departments. But the whole purpose of CDIO periodic survey is to give you a benchmark. So when you go to your accreditation agency, you can say, well, here's where we fall among programs like ours that are adopting CDIO. So there's a point of reference. The next one, again, Accreditation Light, is a certification process that takes place within the regions. This is completely voluntary, as is all of CDIO. Obviously, you volunteer to join CDIO, you volunteer to do the self-evaluation, you volunteer to be part of the survey periodically. And the certification process is really something that was added at the request of some of the newer programs, the newer regions of the world, where there isn't an accreditation process in place. They may have some standards, but there isn't a formal accreditation process that they can tap into. So they need to have some way to say, yes, I'm a certified CDIO program. That's one of the things it tried to address. So it's, again, initiated by collaborators. If you, as an institution, felt that you would benefit either internally to show your administration that you are interested and active and engaged in CDIO, and that would be a benefit internally, or if you wish to use it for external purpose, which might be a sort of accreditation process, we have set up this several-step method that you can actually work with your regional group in developing a process where you can go through the self-evaluation, have someone verify it, and then actually get designated as CDIO certified. While we have this last step, the key is that it really meets your needs. Is 3 years about right? We figure 6 years is probably about the extent because programs change so much over a 5 to 6 year period. But we think that 3 to 6 years is about a reasonable certification time frame. The decisions are basically in the hands of the region. What would go to the international program, the International Council, would simply be some documentation that said these programs have been certified over this period of time. So the whole emphasis is down at the region because we feel that the regions know the norms, they know the institutions, and they can make the most informed decisions. So this is, again, the next step before you get to actual accreditation. We need to make sure that our system supports national requirements and that we have evidence and documentation that people can use. And I think there'll be a number of sessions that we'll see today that will exactly show you what people have done. For example, in the paper, there is an example that Ed Crowley and Doris did in the book on accreditation in higher education and engineering that really looks at ABET versus CDIO. But many people have done a lot of different comparisons with different accreditation schemes throughout the world. And what we need to do is we have to understand the similarities and differences. So that's the kind of the big, large overview of how CDIO supports accreditation and quality assurance. And so what we tried to do is look at the exponential growth, make sure that we have quality assurance structures in place, that we have looked at a way that we can address those concerns and answer the question, how can we maintain our brand as a CDIO collaborative? Thank you. Sure.
Well, I just have a question about this quality system. I don't
Yes.
know it really well, but
Sure.
I know there are 12 standards.
Yes.
And that the quality of the program is decided on the basis of those 12 standards.
Right.
Student performance deciding the quality of the program, because what I think is that you can easily have adherence or compliance.
Absolutely. Right.
You could have still a failure rate of 50 or 60 or 70.
Well, there's two issues there. First of all, this specifically addresses learning outcomes, so that as part of the regular progression in from 0 up to a 5 in terms of addressing that, how well are you achieving or complying with that standard, you would be looking at the success rate. So let's say that your success rate is 50% or less. That would have been identified as part of the data that you collected, and then the question is, what have you done about that? Have you used that information to make improvements? Now, you can decide whether 50% is good or not. I mean, unfortunately, in many institutions in the United States, the average success rate, graduation rate, is well below 50%. We have an open education system, and in many of our state institutions, especially small ones, fewer than 50% of our students graduate. Now, there are lots of structural issues there, so if we set a standard 75% of all of our students have to graduate, that would really disadvantage them. So we feel that that's something that the individual institution, along with their local administrative structure and so on, should decide what's the appropriate level of accomplish. We want to make sure that you address that you identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and that you actually have a plan to address the weaknesses.
Well, just to comment to that, what I understood from my previous session was that the standard was about whether you have made learning outcomes explicit. Not about whether
accomplish them. Right. But it seems to me when you get into this standard that part of the continuous process is to look at those standards and see whether you're meeting the standards as well. I mean, not just are they explicit, but what extent are you actually addressing those standards?
What level is the CDIO accreditation envisaged? I mean, does it require that a complete faculty of engineering would be? Not at all.
It's completely voluntary, depending on whether it's just programmatic.
The one program in
sure. Correct. If that meets their needs, it is a supplementary program. Many of us, perhaps in North America and Europe, have so many accreditation layers that really wouldn't serve any purpose. It would just be a work for we're not sure. But there are many other areas of the country, and maybe even specific programs, where they don't have a larger accreditation process available, where this would actually serve to give them more credibility. And that would be up to the discretion of the local institution and local programs.
And up to the discretion of the region, whether they even want to implement that, because it's effort for
it's a lot. So they've got to find reviewers. They have to do all that, right? So it really had, that's why we said the first thing was it's really a regional decision, whether that makes sense to the certification. The structure's there, but it's up to the regions and then the programs to implement it. Yes?
On the slide there, you're talking about the certification?
Yes.
There's a note that said, first of all, is that the actual system or is that a straw man? For
No, that is the actual system.
Which standards are the primary standards and which are the secondary? I'm not sure I see that breakdown.
I don't know. Yeah, I should have asterisked them here. They're primarily the ones that have to do with this, I remember, sort of these ones in the middle, and I think program evaluation, not but learning assessment. So the original document has a little, they have an asterisk next to it. I should have done that. Sorry that I didn't. It's 7 of the 12, right? I think that's right. Okay. Thank you.